Welcome to On the Way, where we explore the difference following Jesus makes in our lives. During Season 4, we are talking about the fruit of the Spirit, listed by Paul in Galatians 5:22 and 23. On the Way is produced by the Baptist Standard, a donor-supported provider of news, opinion, and resources for living like Jesus. We're glad you're with us today. We have with us today Stephen Reeves. He is the new Executive Director for Fellowship Southwest. Stephen, we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Eric. Really great to be with you. Appreciate the invitation.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Fellowship Southwest?
Well, sure. Happy to. Fellowship Southwest is a pretty young organization, an ecumenical, multiracial organization centered in the Southwest, Texas and Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and all the way to Southern California. Really focused on really compassion and justice for folks in this area of the country, and putting Christians together to do the work together, kind of across different types of lines and barriers that we usually see. And it's certainly this has meant a lot of work on the border and what's been going on there in the last few years.
Yeah, and more work to come.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, Stephen is with me today to talk about goodness. We're talking about the fruit of the Spirit, and so we're going to talk about goodness. And we're not talking about goodness gracious or my goodness or anything like that. We're talking about goodness as a fruit of the Spirit that Paul lists in Galatians 5:22. Mm-hmm. So tell us about the biblical understanding of goodness.
Sure. I think, when I hear that word in a biblical context, my mind actually first goes to Psalm 23, of that closing of that passage. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
All right.
And when you think about that, that is a psalm of God's faithfulness, of God being good, of Him walking with us and providing. And so, that's sort of where I center it, of the goodness of God. And then I think of Genesis 1, of creation being good. God saw it and saw that it was good, and it was good, over and over and over again. And so I think of the provision of God, His faithfulness, and then abundance and balance and harmony that was there at creation.
So I'm going to jump in real quick, because the way you've defined that so far, by going to Psalm 23 and Genesis 1, what I'm hearing you say is that goodness is, one, defined by God, and it's imparted by God. Because creation, He repeats again and again, this is good, this is good, this is good. Creation hadn't done anything to earn that label. This was God's determination.
That's right. And I think it was, just as mankind was made in God's image, He put a part of Himself in creation and said, this is good, this is good. And so I think the goodness then starts with God.
Okay. So where Paul uses this word then, he's using a word that is rooted in or finds its origin in character in God.
I would say yes. I'd agree with that for sure.
Yeah. When I think about goodness, of course, there is Psalm 23, of course, and a song comes to my mind. I did this with Craig Curry in an interview with him, and a song came to my mind, but I'm not going to sing in this one. So, right. Yeah, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Yeah. But I also think about Soren Kierkegaard's book. Actually, it didn't start out as a book. It became one. Purity of heart is to will one thing. And he talks about being willing to be so singularly focused and committed to the good that a person would be willing to suffer anything for the good.
Yeah. I think that, going back to the fruit of the Spirit that Paul lays out there, I mean, that is that kind of commitment, right? That the things that he lists, the love and joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, just on and on. To me, that's where you commit to that, and you get to that level that you mentioned with Kierkegaard.
Now, when we get to Paul, it seems like, at least in the context, that he's moving beyond simply a description of someone given by God, and he's using a word that actually refers to an action. So goodness then would suggest that this isn't just necessarily a state of being, it's also a description of how we carry ourselves in the world.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. As I was thinking on goodness, I also thought of 2 Peter, where it says we are called by His goodness, and then to support your goodness with knowledge and self-control, and then it kind of goes on from there. But it really talks about the goodness of our actions being part of our witness, and so that goodness is beyond just sort of that character, and it is part of our actions as Christians, for sure.
You mean it's related to our testimony? To our witness?
I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
If we don't look to others like we have the fruit of the Spirit, perhaps they're not going to be so interested in the type of faith we are proclaiming, if it doesn't seem to be put into practice.
We'll be right back after a 15-second sponsor break.
Since 1952, South Texas Children's Home Ministries has focused on healing hearts and sharing hope. Their 9 ministries focus on helping hurting children and families, all regardless of an individual's ability to pay. To find out more, visit www.stchm.org.
So, what is this goodness then that we're talking about? What does it look like in the world that we're in? Because I don't know about you, but I would not necessarily describe what I see in the world as so often as good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't feel like that anyway.
I agree, and I think going back to the fruit of the Spirit, that goodness is listed among these other things, of peace, love, joy, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. To me, those are all part of the goodness. And then as I was reflecting back on it, I was really taken by the descriptions of what is the flesh and how accurate they are in describing what we see in our world today: hatred, discord, envy, jealousy, rage, selfish ambition, dissension, and factions. And I just think, well, if that's not a good description of where we find ourselves in so many places, it's hard to think of another time where there was. And so, I feel like so often we're in a world where people seem to want to be angry, and people are constantly fearful. And I think when you're in that posture, it's hard to focus on or act out of goodness.
Say more about that.
Yeah,
'Cause I think there's a lot more meat in that statement. I want to sit with that for a moment.
Well, I came to this by thinking about really Paul's exhortation at the end of Philippians, where he says, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, pure, pleasing, think on these things. And to me, that's a kind of a roadmap to goodness in a way, where I think so many folks spend time, one way or another, whether you want to talk about politics or social media or cable news, focusing on not those things and focusing on what they're afraid of or what they're angry about. And so to me, where we put our mind is going to really impact the goodness, whether it's the goodness in us or certainly the goodness in how we act outwardly, for sure.
I want to dig a little bit more into that, because you referred to the list of sort of fleshly traits that Paul lists right before the fruit of the Spirit. And so if we're still unsure about what goodness is, we can look at that list for a description of what goodness is not.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. And
well, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think I was just struck in the moment and looking back at that. Obviously there are things like sexual impurity and things that sometimes I feel like we hear a lot more about. But the idea of, selfish ambition and just discord itself, just, hatred and discord itself being right there listed with the other things that sometimes we think of as flesh was really surprising and impactful to me to go back and reflect on it, given sort of our contentious and disunified times we're living in.
Mm-hmm. So if contention and disunity are not good, and it's so prevalent, what does that suggest about the times that we're in?
Well, that goodness has not been much of a motivating factor for a lot of folks, I would say. And I think absolutely that of the flesh, the selfish things. I mean, that selfish ambition to me is a strong word there, because I think we are living in times of, selfish times, very individualistic times, where folks think a lot about them and what they have or don't have, or their own personal viewpoints on things, and don't think so much community. And I think when you are focused so much on kind of your individual self, it's harder to think of a goodness in a way that is supportive of a community. And I think, that's it's sort of an eternal battle. I think in a lot of ways, that's always been a conflict for humans. But right now, I feel it so strongly that there's this lack of empathy, lack of compassion for somebody that you may consider other. And that leads to the things of the flesh. That leads to away from goodness.
Where are you seeing this goodness practiced?
Well, just today I was writing about and thinking about what in the news about refugees recently. And to me, that I work in public policy and advocacy, and both migrants on the border and refugees that are coming from other countries already vetted. I see so much goodness in the folks that welcome them, in field personnel that work for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, in pastors on the border who are risking their lives to offer hospitality in a form of goodness to folks who are really hurting. And so to me, that's just top of mind for me, because that's part of what I do on a daily basis is work with folks who are working with those populations. And there's so much goodness, and it transcends party affiliation, it transcends faith, it transcends denominations. There's a lot of goodness going on right now in that realm.
We'll be right back after this short sponsor break. High Ground Advisors has a 90-year history of providing investment management and planned giving solutions to churches, faith-based organizations, and charitably minded individuals dedicated to transforming lives. High Ground is trusted by over 450 nonprofit clients, and we're one of them. High Ground has partnered with Baptist Standard for over 70 years by offering a comprehensive charitable giving and investment solutions model, which includes asset management, planned giving education and development, account support services, real estate and minerals management, and expert legal consultation. High Ground and the Baptist Standard share similar values, such as serving those who are called and dedicated to transforming lives and being a trusted caretaker of legacies. They also value good stewardship, helping those who desire to be good stewards of their financial resources to find creative giving solutions to fulfill that calling. We trust High Ground and consider them a loyal partner because they deliver the performance results we depend on to grow our mission. With nearly a century dedicated to the nonprofit sector, and as a nonprofit themselves, they understand the needs and challenges specific to us. They give us the opportunity to work with people who share our faith and values. They come alongside our mission in ways that other investment management firms can't. They know that what they do to protect, strengthen, and grow our mission is ultimately in service to the gospel. To learn more about how High Ground can partner with you or your organization, visit their website at highgroundadvisors.org.
what you just said about this goodness transcending party affiliations, it takes me back to the end of the list where Paul says, against such things there is no law. And that has a specific meaning. And yet, in the context of sort of our political climate and the divisiveness and discord in our politics, that goodness is something that both sides, if we want to talk about sides, we can come together at the point of goodness.
I think so, and I think both sides violate goodness and act in ways that counter goodness, and both sides can often find common ground around things that are good and the goodness. And I think we've got to think on those such things, right? We've got to spend more time working towards that if we're going to really pull ourselves out of what I think is a dire situation in many respects.
You and I both have kids.
Yes.
And
I hope you're not hearing them right now, because they're all around just outside the office door. But yes, 3 kids.
So when you think about goodness and you think about the work that you do in the world, you and I both, we don't think about this as an intellectual exercise or something to earn a paycheck. We're mindful of the effects of goodness or the effects of the lack of goodness personally. And I'm curious, what ways would you say someone who wanted to teach their children about goodness and how to be good, how to embody goodness, what would you say to somebody about how to do that?
I would go straight to the golden rule, to the second greatest commandment, to loving your neighbor as yourself, the opposite of selfishness. To me, that is at the heart of goodness. And I think that, for me, doing this work, having kids, thinking about the future of my country or the future of the church, I want to impress upon my children that Christians and Baptists and folks in our country look out for others and have a community mentality, the common good being important, and really thinking about, if you want it for yourself, you should want it and work for it for everyone else. And so that, to me, is really important. And it's the sort of thing that sometimes I don't think we hear enough of in the church and Christian context. That too often I think the messages can be too individualistic and also based in fear and sometimes even anger. And so that's in my work and with my children in the future, that's more important for me. That I didn't even plan that, but y'all probably heard that. To me, that's really important.
Yeah. I heard, not only did I hear the sound of a little one, which is great. I don't want to cut that out at all. I also heard that there's fear. I would add that there's anxiety. It would seem to me that we are in anxious times, and sometimes that is expressed in fear, sometimes it's expressed in anger. It looks a lot like hatred in some places. But it seems to me that anxiety is also an opposite of good.
I would think so. I think it's very hard to act out of anxiety in a way that's good. If you're worried, I think anxiety leads to sort of self-preservation, which is also, a kind of that form of selfishness, back to that self and that individualistic mindset. And so, there are things to be anxious about. There's no doubt about it. But we are in the midst of lots of rapid change. But I think that anxiety is just kind of a barrier to goodness, I guess you would say.
I'm thinking about what you're saying, and right now in Texas there are several bills before the legislature. By the time this podcast interview airs, decisions will have been made about those bills. And one of the questions about almost each one is, what is good for our state? What is good for our communities? At the church level, pastors and leaders are asking, what is good for my congregation? Through the pandemic, they were constantly, and still, almost week by week, trying to figure out what is best for my congregation. Mm-hmm. Do we meet in person? Do we not? Do we open worship back up in person, or do we stay online? It sounds like goodness is something that we are constantly engaged in seeking.
Yeah, I think we have to be. I think that's part of faith. I mean, if it was easy, I don't recall the easiness being a big sell for Jesus, who took up his cross and asked us to do the same. So yeah, I think as faithful, thoughtful Christians, you have to struggle to be good and to practice goodness. And I think, you mentioned the political context. I think what's really important for me, and what is sometimes I think is not often enough seen in the political context, is thinking beyond just party, right? Where my primary voters, if that's all you're thinking about, then I think it's harder to get to goodness, to think about the common good and for people who maybe aren't like you and aren't like your primary voters, which is what it boils down to so often in politics. And so I think that it is difficult. And, similarly, they're leading a congregation. I mean, I know this has been one of the most stressful times for any pastors I've talked to.
Yeah.
And it's also, you're not just thinking about, okay, the young, healthy families, but what about the vulnerable, the older members? And I think that's a lot. It is a constant thing to weigh on your mind, to try and reach goodness in these sorts of decisions.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, we're getting close to the end. What I hear, another thing that I hear is that trying to define goodness actually is not rocket science. It's not some secret knowledge that we have to know the magical keys to unlock. It's almost, as you said in the very beginning, by nature of God creating us, it's inside. Well, when I say inside of us, I mean God put it in us. We know intuitively what goodness is. It's not rocket science to figure it out, but practicing it feels like rocket science because we're constantly at war with ourselves. And
absolutely,
yeah.
I think it's always tempting to go with the selfish, and I think if you know goodness sometimes by what it's not, then you look back at those things that are the flesh, and it's to me it's the combination of the fruits of the Spirit and the golden rule, and I think I do believe that God works through us and works through our minds and hearts, and so we can get there, even to know what it is, even when it is difficult to practice.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you for talking with me today and for helping us think about and think through goodness.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for the invitation. It's good to be with you. And yeah, this could keep going on. This is a good conversation. So glad to be a part.
Following Jesus is a way of life carried out over a lifetime. If this podcast has encouraged you to become a follower of Jesus or to follow him more closely, we'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this podcast or found it helpful, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts so others can find it more easily. Thank you for being with us today. On the Way is produced by the Baptist Standard, a donor-supported provider of news, opinion, and resources for living like Jesus. To make a donation, visit baptiststandard.com/donate. To receive the Baptist Standard weekly newsletter, visit baptiststandard.com and click or tap subscribe.